How's a guy supposed to break out of here?
Don't be a stranger.
He surrendered almost without a fight. I don't like it.
I set a trap, and you sprang it gloriously. Now let's get this party started!
There's no escape, Joker.
I don't want to escape. I'm having way too much fun.
Why, my dear delusional Dark Knight.
It hasn't even begun.
The year is 2009, a year after The Dark Knight released in theaters. There had not yet been a great Batman game aside from the Lego one. During this era, movie tie-in games were the big thing. EA's Batman Begins was not a big hit at all. We also learnt that they cancelled the Dark Knight game because Gary Oldman leaked it once. You see, superhero games have always been hit or miss. Because of the whole EA fiasco, Eidos Interactive gained the licensing for Batman and hired Rocksteady Studios to create their own Batman game. Up until this point, making a superhero game was risky. It was almost guaranteed to be a flop. What happened after that though is history, a game that redefined and shaped the future of superhero games, a game that spawned 3 sequels with varying qualities. Batman Arkham Asylum released 14 years ago to critical acclaim, and in this video I want to discuss whether or not the game has held up as well as people claim it has, and if it's worth playing today. To do this, I'll be breaking down the game's story, combat, bosses, the atmosphere, and the bits of extra spice this game has, giving my opinions on them throughout. This video will obviously have spoilers and opinions, so if you haven't played it yet, I recommend you do so first. And if you think I'm wrong, feel free to start discussion or just insult me and tell me that I'm brain dead and not a stamped and certified Arkham gamer, whichever one you please. The story of Arkham Asylum is quite short, coming in at around 8 hours. Rocksteady wanted to create an original story for the game instead of adapting a comic book or previously told story, so they hired Paul Dini, most notably known for his contributions to the animated series and Batman Beyond, to write a completely original story for the game. Just having Dini writing the game wasn't enough to really make the game special though. To really make it a Batman game, they decided almost immediately that they need to get the perfect castings for the game. So they did, hiring the main cast from the animated series, Kevin Conroy as Batman, Arlene Sorkin as Harley Quinn, and Mark Hamill as the Joker. Why mess with a different cast when perfection had already been established? The cherry on top though is Tom Kane as Gordon. I can recognise Takeo and Clone Wars Yoda from anywhere. Both Rocksteady and Dini wanted the story to be short and sweet, confined in a small area as the scope was not giant for the first game. Based off this, they both thought it would be great to put Batman in the Arkham Asylum, locked in with many fan favourite villains under the rule of Joker. Sefton Hill, the co-owner of Rocksteady, compared Arkham Asylum to a pressure cooker, in that the game is putting Batman in the madhouse and letting the Joker turn up the heat. The story was set then. Whilst it was an original story, it still took inspiration from and references of the Batman media such as the comic books and the animated series, both of which Dini has worked on. I didn't mention that past Batman games were referenced as Rocksteady did not even give them a second of thought. An interview with Paul Crocker highlighted this. When asked if they went through some of the old releases to see what he wanted to avoid, he responded with, "To be completely honest, we didn't even look at them for inspiration or what to avoid or anything like that. We started by focusing on who is Batman, what does Batman bring to a game, how can we push that experience." I wouldn't have referenced them either. Apart from the average Batman Begins game, no other 3D Batman game was even worth looking at. This game primarily takes its inspiration from the 1989 issue Arkham Asylum: A Serious House on Serious Earth. You can tell throughout your playthrough as well. The game has a more dark and gritty approach to Batman compared to the past outings. I'm sure we're all quite familiar with the dark and gritty Batman by now, with the Snyder movies and Matt Reeves' gothic noir. I cannot voice my opinion on which one I prefer, as Twitter would have my home address and stand outside shouting that I don't know real cinema. I digress. The game does not use the same villains as the comic though. It primarily just took inspiration from the overall atmosphere and tone. This game is the darkest Batman game up until this point. The game starts with Batman personally escorting Joker into Arkham Asylum. Unbeknownst to the Bat, this is all a part of the Joker's plan, as the Joker escapes from capture and takes control of the asylum, with assistance from Harley Quinn and a paid-off cop. He then releases nearly every inmate in the asylum, from Victor Zsasz to Scarecrow. After saving a few guards from Zsasz and fighting off some mutated prisoner, Batman is informed that Frank Bowles is the Rat, and has also kidnapped Gordon at Joker's command. so he tracks him down by following the vapor trail of his whiskey. Batman reaches Balls but finds him tied dead to a stretcher. He then overhears on a radio that if anyone else steps a foot on the island, then the multiple bombs that he's planted around will explode, leaving Batman to tackle the asylum alone. Batman rushes to his definitely not insured Batmobile and pummels the thugs who are attacking it. From here, he fears that Gordon is actually in trouble, and surprise surprise, Gordon was just here not moments ago. So Batman follows a trail of tobacco to find Gordon, but soon finds himself hallucinating visions of a dead Gordon and his parents in body bags. This is his first encounter with Scarecrow. Batman fights off his thoughts and prevails against him. Scarecrow then scuttles off. After locating Gordon and knocking out Harley Quinn, the duo discover Dr. Young's patient X, Bane. She's using Bane's venom to develop a new experimental formula. Bane begs Batman to let him free, but the Joker has different plans. Bane is then injected with his venom and goes berserk. After defeating Bane, Batman heads into his lab to investigate what is in that formula. It turns out that Young was developing a much stronger version of Venom called Titan. The Titan project was being funded by Mr. Jack White, the name the Joker goes by when doing any business. He plans on using Titan to create an entire army of Banes, which would be devastating, to say the least. Realising this, Batman rushes to get to Young's notes before the Joker does. He reaches Dr. Young's office to find the notes gone. She's already taken them. In turn, Batman tracks her fingerprints, leading him to the library, where he then finds the notes and burns them. Batman tries to find Dr. Young, but veers off the path when he gets fear-gassed by Scarecrow yet again whilst walking down the halls, reliving his parents' death and being forced to fight his mind for the second time. Once he's out of this state, he then saves Dr. Young from being tortured by Victor Zsasz. She informs Batman that the Joker now has the formula, but he doesn't have the security codes to the lab. They're in the Warden's vault. As she goes to open the vault, it explodes, killing her and knocking out Batman. Batman wakes up to the Warden being clubbed by Harley Quinn. She runs off with the Warden hostage. Batman then chases her to the penitentiary. He reaches Poison Ivy, who begs him to save her plants as she's still locked in a cell. Batman declines because apparently the Joker's more important than the local ecosystem. Quinn passes by her and lets her out just for the sake of it. Batman follows Quinn further into the penitentiary, where he also happens to find Warden Sharp in the control room. He's sharing a section of the area with two nice fellows. One looks like he won a competition to have his face put in the game, and the other, well, I don't exactly know since he changes his appearances whenever I look away. I think he may be a living wax figure or like Clayface or something. One thing I do know though is he's not Gordon nor is he Sharp, who I've just saved. Batman and Ivy meet again not long after. She tells Batman that there is a plant that can be used for an antidote and it is located in Killer Croc's lair in the sewers after realising the damage Titan can do to a plant. As Batman leaves the gardens, Ivy is injected with Titan, causing the plants to go berserk. The plants mutated and grew massively, enveloping the island in monstrous vines. Batman inquires about how he can access the sewers, to which Aaron Cash tells him that he can, through a tunnel located in intensive treatment. Batman heads back into intensive treatment. Upon his entry, he starts coughing. Something is off.
The game starts with the Joker personally escorting the Batman into Arkham Asylum with the assistance from Harley Quinn and Crane. Unbeknownst to the Joker, this is all a part of Batman's plan. Batman tries to escape from capture and takes a blow to the head, courtesy of the Joker.
Start the party with a bang.
Batman resurrects in his nightmares, fending off his deepest thoughts once again to overcome Scarecrow's reign of terror. Scarecrow flees into the sewers to enact his swan song. He threatens to drop a bag of fear toxin into the entire water supply, like how Batman begins. But from out of nowhere, Killer Croc emerges from the water and snaps him up, mangling him. Batman sneaks around the sewers and grabs the spores, avoiding Killer Croc as he jumps out at him. He narrowly escapes, dropping Killer Croc down deeper into the sewers, at the end, using explosive gel. He heads back to the Batcave to develop an antidote. As he's creating the formula, Ivy's mutated plants destroy the Batcave, leaving him with only a small amount of the cure. Furious, he charges back to the botanical gardens to stop Ivy. He succeeds in this, blowing up the main plant that houses her. There's only one person left now, the Joker. Batman heads to the visitor center, his name on the list, special guest in fact, although he's the only one on the list. He walks towards the TV talking to him, which blows up in his face, knocking him out. He then wakes up in the Joker's throne room, where Joker's holding Scarface, the ventriloquist doll on his knee, not the drug kingpin. After fighting some goons and 2 titans, Joker reveals that he has once again kidnapped Gordon, and is planning on injecting him with Titan. As Joker shoots the syringe, Batman jumps in front of the needle and resists the change, to Joker's dismay. Annoyed by this, Joker injects himself with Titan, and turns into a towering monster, ribs protruding out of his torso and his back looking like a Spinosaur. He carries Batman up to the roof, to finally kill him in front of the news helicopters. Just before the fight commences, Batman uses the antidote on himself to prevent the Titan from working. Quite brave, honestly. Batman fights waves of goons between hammering the Joker, and ends the final fight when he right-hooks the Joker's jaw with explosive gel, knocking him unconscious. The game ends with the villains being escorted and put back in the asylum, some of them worse for wear. Gordon is talking to Batman when suddenly they hear on the news that Two-Face is robbing a bank. As Gordon turns around to talk to Batman, he's disappeared. Above, the Batwing soars towards Gotham. A final cutscene shows one of 3 villains grabbing a loose crate of Titan floating in the water, those being either Killer Croc, Bane or Scarecrow. So that's the story of Arkham Asylum. Short and sweet, just as planned. It was a great first outing for the series, a love letter to the Caped Crusader. The magic of Asylum is that it never overstays its welcome. It's linear and easy to follow. There's no need to head to external forums or have a great depth of knowledge about every character's backstory. What you see is enough. The story is essentially a long episode of the animated series, albeit a lot darker. Makes sense considering who wrote it. Let's zoom out and look at the story as a whole. The writing of Asylum is tight and consistent. There's a complete lack of filler. Every single story beat is paced extremely well. So well, in fact, that you can finish the game in one sitting without even thinking about it. There's also no side quests either, unlike the later open world entries in the franchise, aside from the Riddler trophies and the Chronicles of Arkham. I love the linearity of this game. In the later games, you're free to roam around the areas, only progressing the story when you choose to. Compare this to Asylum, where you're pretty much forced to progress through to get anywhere. This game gets a fair amount of criticism for its opening. The slow burn of entering the asylum and meeting your enemies is not everyone's cup of tea, especially for 10 minutes. To me, it's the perfect introduction to the game, my favourite in the series in fact. A 10-minute walk of impending doom alongside the Joker. Not 1 second goes by in that intro where you're not on edge. Every moment you expect something to go horribly wrong. Meeting Killer Croc and him towering over Batman just to inform him that he has his scent. That one sentence fills you with terror. You know Croc means it and how dangerous he is. The threat of him just being anywhere is frightening. We do see that he has a shock collar, which keeps him from snapping, so remember that just in case we need to exploit it. You get introduced to Aaron Cash, who plays a minor role in this game but becomes a more prominent figure in the later entries. This game also establishes the hook for his hand, courtesy of Killer Croc. Throughout the intro, even though Joker is strapped to a stretcher, he's menacing and can scare the guards just by saying boo, without even lifting a finger. When he inevitably becomes free from capture, the game goes from unnerving but controlled to frenzied pandemonium and chaos, all at the swipe of a keycard. That's how you start a story. After the game's intro, you're essentially following a carrot on a stick that's been dangled right in front of you. Every time Batman gets 1 step closer, something else happens which knocks him 1 step back. For example, the spores that you need couldn't just be retrieved from the gardens, instead you had to head into Killer Croc's lair. Batman now has a cure, but Titan vines destroyed the Batcave, disabling his ability to prevent more than just one Titan transformation from occurring. Every bit in the story follows the structure of this was going to happen, but this happened instead, subverting the easy route, all the way to the very end when you think that everyone was put back in the asylum. That's what makes the story so enjoyable to me. I love that in this game, the Joker and Batman trade places of who is 1 step ahead. Joker's on his A game here against the world's greatest detective. Joker gives Batman the chance to kill him and end it all, knowing that he won't. Joker then releases his experimental super soldier just to show Batman a glimpse of what's to come. Constantly throughout the game, Batman's being teased by the Joker, he's under surveillance by him every step of the way. Even early on in the game, you can see that his encore was planned from the beginning. thugs were building the entrance at the visitor centre the first time you pass it, he's a step ahead again when we reach the Warden's vault. We're led to believe that we got there first, but we were mistaken, Dr. Young losing her life as a result. It's only at the finale when Batman truly prevails and surpasses Joker. Even then he's at a severe disadvantage, but ultimately the pure iron will of Batman prevails. My favourite part of the story has to be the encounters with Scarecrow. That first encounter with fear gas in the morgue is brilliant. The lead up to it, where Batman's eyes are glowing red, the fact that Batman fears that Gordon is dead and that he couldn't save him. When Batman reaches the morgue, he looks round and exits the room into the same room back to back to back. You know that the fear toxin's affecting him. Upon opening the first 2 body bags, Bruce sees his dead parents, who have pale blue skin, glowing eyes, undead pretty much. They ask him why he didn't stop their murder and save them. Is that what Bruce fears? Does he fear that he's let them down? As he goes to open the third, Scarecrow jump scares Batman and causes him to fall into the depths of his mind, the nightmare world. The second encounter emphasises this fear of not being good enough as he revisits his parents' murder. Even after all these years of being Batman, the only thing that haunts him is the loss of his family. This gets drilled into even further in Arkham Knight. The third encounter is probably the most memorable, the fake out game corruption as you return into intensive treatment. That actually quite scared me when it first happened. I thought my graphics card were on its way out due to high temps at the peak of summer. I clocked in on that it was intentional once the moon had Scarecrow's face in it. The swap to playing as Joker as you escort Batman into the asylum is such a great little sequence that is completely unexpected. During the nightmare sequence, Batman finishes his first dose of toxin and snaps back to reality, holding Scarecrow by the neck. Scarecrow starts his second round of treatment. In this vision, you see Batman trapped in a cell, scratching at air and another one eating a rat. His billionaire Batman scared of what he believes the prisoners eat. He then fights a bunch of skeletons, including a brute one. Back in reality, Scarecrow injects him with even more, enough to drive 10 men insane, but Batman's mental fortitude wins again. Scarecrow breaks free and runs off. Overall, the Scarecrow sequences are the strongest part of the game for me, and they're the part I remember the most after my playthroughs. I think that they're the highlights of the game and that they happen at the perfect points throughout the game. It also probably helps that I really like Scarecrow as a villain, though I believe that his presence is great no matter if you're a big fan of the character or not. On the other hand though, this game's not without its flaws. I'm sure most of us share the same sentiment regarding our least favourite part of the game, that being the ending of it. It just doesn't do the rest of the game justice. It's not that it's bad, it's just alright. The ending is the hardest part of a story to get right. You have to provide a satisfying closure to a story whilst also tying it up in a way that makes sense and is deserving. All the story components must collaborate to allow this to happen. What irks me is that all the pieces are there for the great ending, but it just falls flat once it comes to the end. By the time you reach the end of the game, you've already fought 2 Titan boss fights and many Titan thugs. Making the ending boss fight another Titan enemy, albeit the Joker this time around, is just a bit lazy in my opinion. It does make sense, but it's just not the ending I think the game deserves. The end of the fight though is really good, where Batman right hooks him with explosive gel. I quite enjoyed that part. I do like how the ending sets up the story of the next 2 sequels, in a way that wasn't obvious at the time. I don't think anyone expected Joker to get blood illness and how it would eventually lead up to the end of the series.
Die, you big ugly bat!
What are you?
You're dead and buried, darling.
The bosses are something I don't think this game does particularly well either. Actually, I think it's generally Rocksteady's weakness in game design. For every Mr. Freeze boss fight, you have an Asylum Bane boss fight. That's not to say that they're straight up bad in Asylum, but they're just not good. They're boring, monotonous, and just unengaging to play through. The Bane boss fight was set up to be terrifying, a giant brute who only has one goal, to break the bat. Instead of a one-on-one David vs Goliath situation, it's in fact Batman vs 20 thugs with the occasional dodge of a Titan enemy. The confined Titan fight near the end of the game was a much better fight and wasn't even a major part of the plot. Bane, whilst being a key component in the story, was sidelined ridiculously quick and did not have the presence he deserved. The Killer Croc boss fight is fine as far as gameplay goes. It's not so much a boss fight, rather a boss sequence ripped out of a horror game. It excels at providing a good scare when he jumps out, but after the first 3 times it starts getting old quick. The entire sequence drawn out a bit too much, to the point where it becomes stale, and I just want it to be over, rather than left wanting more. My first playthrough though, I loved it. The Ivy boss fight is alright, I guess. Similar to the others, it's just boring. This one especially was just way too long and tedious. Dodge, throw, fight, thugs, throw. Pretty unengaging gameplay loop really. Not much else to say, it's just an average boss fight. And finally, by far the most disappointing in Asylum, somehow not the series, is the Joker, the final boss, it's not even a fight against him. You fight 10 thugs, pull down the Joker with the ultra grapple gun, smack him a few times and then run off from his 5-second attack phase, rinse and repeat 3 times. It's such a shame that the end of the game ended like that. It's a stain on an otherwise almost perfect game. Luckily the rest of the game can carry the subpar boss fights and is still regarded as a modern classic. After the story is all done and dusted, all but one villain is defeated, the Riddler, the zany version of him, not the Reddit moderator incel one. We become familiar with the Riddler very early on in the game. His self-introduction happens during one of the first stealth sections in Intensive Treatment, right after we discover that Officer Balls has been killed. His first few words cement him as the maniacal egotist he is, with his COD lobby sounding name and his Clarkson-esque quote.
My genius has allowed me to easily hack into your primitive communications.
He insults Batman and slots himself into this game's story without making a physical appearance. Right there and then we get tasked with solving his first riddle, which is rather easy. They do get a bit harder from here, but it's the Riddler after all. He's not that smart or else he wouldn't have been caught before. To defeat the Riddler, you have to complete his challenge, which consists of you trekking back through the asylum using your entire arsenal of gadgets, driving yourself insane to the point of becoming a patient yourself as you collect the 240 total collectibles. Jokes aside, there are 5 kinds of collectibles in Arkham Asylum, some being more interesting than others and some eventually becoming the worst thing to ever grace the Arkham games as a whole. Let's start off with the simplest one. Throughout the asylum, starting from the beginning of the game, you will walk past many of Joker's chattering teeth, skittish in movement as they navigate the area in sets. You have to destroy every single one of these with batarangs to annoy the Riddler. These weren't so bad as I just hit them as I found them. Some I did not find and had to go through a guide going over each one, which would have been nice if the guide didn't miss a few, but I think that's just a me problem. Riddler trophies are little green question marks that the Riddler has somehow managed to plant all around the asylum in the most hidden locations, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. How did that twiglet of a human being manage to scale up and around the asylum without being killed by the graze of a thorn bush, never mind a thug? To acquire these trophies, you must use platforming techniques and your wide arsenal of gadgets to blow up or scale the local area. The game's Metroidvania-esqueness, I guess you could call it, stems from this, as some trophies are unreachable until you have the right tool. Once you have what you need, you have to trek back right through, sometimes to places you won't have visited since the beginning of the game. These are rather annoying, but they're not as bad in Asylum. The trophies only become increasingly more abundant and irritating in the later games. During your playthrough and after, if you're a completionist, you'll spend a lot of your time solving the riddles that pop up at the top of your screen whenever you enter a new area. These vary in complexity, although none of them are really too hard. To complete the riddles there are 2 types. One is where you have to scan an object which the clue points to, or the other is to line up the neon green question mark painted on a wall. The question marks require the use of detective mode and sometimes also your gadgets. Think in one of the medical areas where you have to blow up the floor to be able to position yourself to see the question mark. Stuff like that. The riddles make you scan whatever the target is. At face value these pose little interest, but if you peel back the wallpaper just a bit you'll see that there's immense storytelling and extra bits of lore to discover. Like in the morgue when you first encounter Scarecrow, a riddle leads you to inspect a jar with a nose, lips and ears in. These aren't just a strange doctor's pickling jar though, they belong to a Mr. Warren White, who you may also know as the gangster Great White Shark. His body parts in the jar as they got frozen off during a bout with Mr. Freeze. This encounter is the reason why he got the alias, filing his teeth down to razor blades to match his moniker. Even if you don't plan on completing the game to 100%, please do every riddle as the amount of extra tidbits of lore within them is extremely interesting and I found it quite worth it. Or I guess you could just watch a video. During your playthrough you are bound to have came across these stones with the scarab placed in the middle of them. Scan these to reveal and listen to the Chronicles of Arkham, a deep dive into the story of Amadeus Arkham, the founder of the asylum. The place named after his own mother, whom he euthanized to treat a dementia. The story touches on his first patient Martin Mad Dog Hawkins, a misogynist at the time but draws more parallels to the average Twitter user now. He killed Amadeus' wife and daughter. This eventually led to Amadeus' descent into madness, insanity and ultimately his death. In conjunction with Cyrus Pinckney, an architect who shared the same beliefs regarding rehabilitation as Arkham, they collaborated to create the asylum to treat and cure the criminally insane. It's obvious that they had fun doing it, and their understanding of treatment is different to the likes of ours, as they built a staircase that led underneath the asylum into hell itself, nicknamed the Devil's Slide. By hell itself I mean that it was quite literally hell for the inmates, as Arkham would take them down there to perform his tortures and his sick twisted experiments on the already ill. Amadeus would take the edge off his patients with his drug concoction, a mixture that would simulate death, a Figaro in his own sense of the word. The tipping point for Arkham was when he finally enacted his revenge on his family's killer. Arkham treated the bad dog with a shock collar after he was initially led to believe that Hawkins was rehabilitated and could be freed. In a meeting with Arkham and his secretary, the mad dog snapped and killed the secretary with his pen. Imagine Arkham jotting down his thoughts in his diary at the time, with some villainous quote like, "He had the tightest grip around the head of my Bic. Now, can I get my pen back?" Surely Arkham would have penned his thoughts like that, right? This would eventually spiral into Arkham becoming medically insane, becoming a patient, in his own asylum, trapped in his own mind, I guess. You can visit his cell in the game, his room patterned with circles. These are binding spells to protect him from the evil bat spirit that drove his mother to insanity, carved into the floor and walls with his fingernails. So that's the story of Amadeus Arkham, from a young prospective student to a murderous spirit that lives on through his own creation. The chronicles did continue after this point and soon start to seem a little too recent, with references to Crane, Poison Ivy and the Joker. This is not Amadeus Arkham, it's someone believing that they are the next coming of him. The spirit of Arkham is alive and well, his influence still looming over the asylum. Well, if it's not Amadeus, who is it? Well, you see, the whole time these chronicles were told by the current warden, Quincy Sharp. He believed that the ghost of Amadeus was walking alongside him through the halls, becoming an authority figure to him, encouraging him to stalk and kill his current patients.
Patient interview 1. Patient was referred to me after the incident with Dr. Murphy.
Interview tapes are the final collectible in Arkham Asylum, and they're by far my favourite. There are 35 of these in the game, 5 tapes for 7 villains. These give an insight into the foes that Batman faces. Through the talks between them and the Doctors, we learn more about these characters, including their pasts, why they do what they do, and what they plan for the future. These interviews help develop the Arkham world without explicitly showing. I think this lends itself to a more thorough story, as instead of seeing them as just bad people, we hear how evil they actually are from their own perspectives. Although this game is the first in the series, this game is not the first time Batman has existed in this universe. It's not a starting point, instead we're placed in the middle of his life. The interview tapes provide backstory before we even installed the game. Because of this, we feel like we've been dropped into an already established world with believable characters. The tapes don't just speak on the criminal's past, they're stories within themselves. The conversations with the Doctors are chilling, and in some cases the criminals even attack the staff.
Is that you? Wait, what are you doing?
Get off of me. Help! I need help here! I can't breathe!
I think my favourite interviews are the ones between Scarecrow and the various Doctors. As we all know, Scarecrow used to be known as Dr. Crane, a psychologist who took extreme interest in fear. He became a professor at Gotham University and used his students as guinea pigs, testing his fear toxin on them and recording the outcome. Theory will take you only so far, I guess. I wonder what Crane could have been if he went into physics instead. I'm sure he could have been a great nuclear engineer. The first interview tape starts completely different compared to the others. Instead of a doctor, it's Crane speaking into the mic, interviewing Dr. Combs after a referral from Dr. Murphy. Scarecrow seems to have used his fear toxin on the Doctor, as he became completely mute and has little to no mental activity. The trauma of his wife and kid's death haunts him. Towards the end of this harrowing interview, guards burst through the door, cutting his appointment short. The next 3 interviews detail a new Doctor named Kellerman's plunge into the abyss of fear. For someone so cerebral, he soon fell victim to his own emotions. Crane's waves of psychiatric prowess eroded the Doctor's stone-faced facade. The 4th tape sees Crane enacting his plan to show off his newest version of fear gas to the guard and the Doctor. It works. Their cries drown out the rest of the tape recording apart from a remark from Scarecrow. Interview tape 1 begins with Scarecrow announcing that he has filled the medical centre with enough gas to break 100 minds. There is one person whose iron will can't be broken though. Batman breaks in through the glass, almost unaltered by the fear gas. Crane is almost speechless, confused as to why this is happening, but at the same time, fascinated. Batman ends the interview commanding Officer Cash to put a formula in the AC to neutralise the gas. This whole time, Batman and Kellerman have been developing a formula to counteract the fear gas. Batman shares his plan and ends it with Crane's own words. I think what I find most interesting in these interviews specifically is how Crane is the authority figure in them. Right up until the very end, he's the one who's in control. He's not insane, just pure danger and a lust for fear. In the third interview, he states how everything we do in our lives is a result of our own fears, like how we go to the doctors because we fear dying. Every single decision is made to nullify a fear. Ridiculously smart character writing, it fits Scarecrow like a needle glove. I also find it pretty cool how these interviews mention the names Murphy and Combs. Both of these names can be attributed to actors who have played Scarecrow in the past. Cillian Murphy in the Nolan trilogy, and Jeffrey Combs, most known for his work in the Reanimator movies, played Scarecrow in the animated series. Nice homage. Arkham Asylum saw the introduction of a combat system that shaped the future of combat in action games, from Sleeping Dogs in the Middle-earth games to their own rivals in Marvel's Spider-Man games. Freeflow Combat was the third solution in Rocksteady's pitch to Eidos. The combat system went through 3 revisions, the first being a straight-up rhythm game. The second was 2D systems, where you had to press buttons at the right time. Sounds a bit like Guitar Hero. These evolved to the third and final rendition, dubbed as the Freeflow system. As with most things in the first entry, this version of combat is at its most bare bones, but it's still enough to be great. Freeflow would only evolve from here. There are 4 actions required for Arkham's combat system, those being attack, counter, stun and dodge. That's it. It's so simple yet so satisfying. After reaching a multiplier of 2, Batman enters a state of freeflow, where his fighting style becomes smooth and snappy. It allows Batman to attack enemies further away at increased speeds and perform critical strikes, making his fighting much more efficient and fluid. It's as if the combat's been ripped straight out of a martial arts movie, like a scene out of 10 Tags of Kwang Tung. This system is grounded in rhythm, as you get punished for spamming buttons with no rhyme or reason. One poorly timed punch and your combos reset back to 0. This harkens back to the drawing board, where this game was initially pitched as a rhythm game. That DNA is still here, albeit a bit more fitting for this kind of game. Whilst in free flow, Batman is glidey, effortlessly transitioning from thug to thug, breaking jaws and snapping legs with ease. It's almost too easy for him. Once you reach a combo of 5, you start getting critical strikes that do more damage to enemies and make your time a whole lot easier. In the latter stages of the game, you'll find yourself gaining the ability to use the Batclaw and Batarangs in tandem with hand-to-hand combat. Chaining these perfectly with punches and kicks pays dividends. It truly makes you feel like, nah, I'm not gonna say it. The combat is really easy, so easy in fact that you can get through the entire game by just pressing a few buttons. The lightning pops up above the head and you press counter, you attack and you win. Maybe stun a few times, there's not much to it. This system is peak fun. I do have gripes with it though. With how the system sort of attaches you to an enemy, you sometimes unintentionally find yourself in the way of a barging titan, or somewhere where you don't want to be, leading to you getting hit and losing your combo. It's actually quite annoying. This issue was dosed excessively during the contained fight and pressure control with the Titan. Since that room is so small, latching from enemy to enemy put me in quite the pickle a few times more than what I would have liked. Was it a skill issue? Yeah, probably. But this issue was mostly ironed out in the newer games. This doesn't detract from the overall experience though. I still believe that the combat in this game holds up to this day. I'm not sure if any other game has a better combat system than Freeflow, to be honest. I'm yet to see evidence. There are 6 types of enemies found within Arkham Asylum, excluding bosses and the special versions found in the Scarecrow encounters. The most common are the standard thugs, who just throw punches at you and hope that you weren't prepared. These can be brutally put into a mild state of being unable to move, not die, with punches and counters, nothing more. Some thugs come just a tad bit more prepared, with a water pipe or a knife. Later on in the game, after the thugs have a shocking revelation that Batman is particularly skilled in hand-to-hand combat, they decide that maybe using electric batons may be a wise idea to stun him. Too bad they don't have training. If they did, then a simple vault over them wouldn't disarm them. Then there's the Titan thugs, who've been injected with the experimental formula Titan, mutated into monsters, still probably less hopped up on chemicals than your average fitness influencer. Throughout the game, predominantly in the outside areas, snipers will pattern them, posted up in guard towers, watching over the area like hawks. Death hawks, that is, as you can just grapple up behind them and take them out. No one will realise. Thugs with normal guns are commonly found in harm's way of Batman. Poor souls. Batman isn't just money and muscle, he's an expert in operating in the shadows. After all, he's the world's greatest detective. Arkham Asylum was a huge step forward in terms of developing Batman in the game medium. Before Asylum, Batman was portrayed as a brooding brute. He didn't really live up to his reputation as the hero who exploits the fear of the unknown. Asylum really nails in the fact that Batman is just as effective, if not even more, when he isn't in the spotlight. The stealth in Arkham Asylum, just like the combat, is quite bare bones compared to the rest of the series, but let's not think about what it could have and instead what it does, because the stealth in this game is incredible. Throughout the duration of your game, you'll run into multiple sections where you've got to get through stealthily, as the guards will be equipped with guns, and getting shot isn't too healthy. The first stealth encounter in Asylum is when you have to save Officer Mike from being tortured and murdered by Zsasz. In this basic tutorial you get shown the basics. For the first time in a Batman game we're given access to detective vision, where we get this X-ray-like vision and can see through walls to gain key information like where enemies are, highlighted red, and interactable objects are highlighted yellow. At the start of every encounter and periodically throughout them, check in your detective vision to plan out and time your next move is the difference between getting spotted and not. In this vision, you can see the heart rates of the thugs, increasing every time you take out a guard. They become more and more erratic and paranoid as you pick them off one by one. They start to huddle in groups, watching each other's backs. It's your job to split them up again and instill the fear of God in them, even more so. The heart rate mechanic was not actually introduced in Asylum though. It debuted in 2005's Batman Begins, the tie-in game. But that game was not particularly remembered very well since it was bang average. EA, how do you fumble a game about a Nolan film? Predator vision in all of the Arkham games can be argued as being way too powerful in stealth, due to being able to see everything and everyone at the toggle of a switch. It almost trivialises the experience of risk and reward. Why risk a takedown when you know that a guy's near? There's no penalisation for just keeping detective vision on the entire time. There's no downsides to it at all. Rocksteady also seem to agree with this, as they would introduce enemies and mechanics that punish you for relying on detective vision too much in the sequels. Stealth in this game is done sparingly. Similar to the rest of the game, it never overstays its welcome and becomes dull. The areas that they take place in are definitely purpose-built for stealth. In a video by Micah Edmonds, he compares the stealth sections to that of a skate park, an analogy quite fitting. In these areas you'll find the densest concentration of stealth apparatus, air vents, vantage points and grates, all for Batman to take advantage of. He can finally channel his inner Bruce, and crawl through air vents and take out terrorists like it's 1988. The stealth rooms are like puzzles that you can solve by just forcing the pieces together. Sure, you could just go in and head-on attack everyone. You might get away with it if they're too slow on the draw. But the magic is in sitting back and playing it slow and methodical, planning your moves in advance and only acting once your plan's foolproof. To aid you in your stealth endeavours, you have full access to Batman's suite of gear, from the sonic batarang to the grapnel gun. All these can be used to lure enemies astray or take them out. You can even use the triple grapnel gun to pull 3 enemies off a ledge and non-lethally break their neck. In addition to your arsenal of gadgetry, you can also use your surroundings to clear rooms. Batman can pull off a multitude of takedowns from almost wherever he happens to be. Similar to an actual bat, Batman can hang upside down from a gargoyle and grab a thug from beneath him and tie him to it, dangling them upside down for others to see. Stealth in this game doesn't always mean that the presence of Batman is unknown. A lot of the time the thugs are completely aware that danger's lurking in the shadows, even Joker knows, as he sits there commentating over it, laughing as his henchmen get picked off one by one. Joker soon gets bored of just watching thugs with guns, and soon realises that the gargoyles scattered around the areas may just be working against his men. To counter this, they've fitted bombs to the gargoyles, which will explode when Batman grapples to them one too many times. Fortunately for Batman, they don't check on top of the big centre structure. That would have helped him in my opinion, but what do I know? Joker also thought that since Batman likes to silently take out people, wouldn't it be neat if we strapped a sound collar onto the thugs so whenever one goes down it rings, alerting the others to the Bat's location? Foolproof, right? Nah, Batman just exploits its alluring ability to take out the rest in classic Bat fashion. What I'm hinting to, if you haven't already sussed it out, is that stealth is quite simple mechanically, and there's not much difference between the first stealth encounter and the last. Saying that, it's still simple and satisfying. I also like the future game stealth, but I feel Arkham Asylum is the entry that puts the most emphasis on it. I'm sure we've all heard it before, each game has something that is better than the others. Origin's best boss fights, City best story, and Night the best gameplay. What does Asylum have though? The atmosphere and setting? Whilst I disagree mostly with the consensus on these next 3 games, I do believe that Asylum does in fact have by far the best atmosphere. Simply putting it, the game captures the essence of a living, breathing gothic madhouse almost perfectly. The graphics of the game, whilst dated, still hold up today as it complements the emotion of the setting. It's like there's a layer of grime wiped on your screen, and no matter how much you scrub it to clean the scum off, it'll still persist. The same can be said for the state of Gotham and the Asylum. Upon your first entry into the Asylum, it is fairly clean and open, but still holds that feeling of unease and torture. It's obvious that the Asylum does not focus on the care of the patients. That feeling only enhances throughout the game as you descend down the elevator into madness. The deeper you descend, the more gritty and vile the Asylum becomes. The medical bays don't seem like they're there for the sole purpose of treatment, but rather experimentation hinted at by mechanical steel talons attached to blood-stained tiled walls, looming over stretchers with restraining attachments on them. Intensive treatment lives up to its name, albeit a bit of an understatement. Everything in there seems like it's put there to just cause maximum trauma in the patients. You don't name somewhere patient pacification and think that it's inviting. Sounds like a trap to me. The cell block areas are no less harrowing either. It's shocking that OSHA haven't shut the entire place down yet. The main cell block houses the enemies known as lunatics, erratic in the way they attack and move. They're perhaps the most unsettling of the accommodated. Still though, I'm sure that they could keep them in control without the need to use electric panelled flooring. Just seems a little bit too heavy-handed if you ask me. Towards the end of the game, we fight Harley Quinn and have to fight off waves of goons whilst rotating from one electrocution of floor to another. As we move, we're joined by those we are fighting against, all wanting to not get shocked to death. It's absurd that this was a plan even thought of, never mind implemented. After this fight, we can examine and take in the surroundings of the room. Along the perimeter are cells suspended by chains. All but 2 are empty. One we put Harley Quinn in, and the other has frozen over. Mr. Freeze is in that cell, but will not make a physical appearance up until the next game. The rest of the cell blocks in the Asylum aren't much better either. The walls and floors have scratches and marks in them courtesy of the inmates clawing for their escape with their nails. Incoherent babblings laid in the walls, echoes and cries for salvation emanate from behind the bars. The small details in the cells and halls provide an insight into the minds of the criminals, as well as implying to us that the Asylum is not a place that is necessarily a force for good. Are we really assisting in an evil arguably worse than the criminals it holds? No, obviously not, but the people who run the Asylum are not people with rehabilitation in their best interests either. The island also houses the Botanical Gardens, where Poison Ivy resides. The garden is home to the plants which are used to develop the formulas and treatments for the patients. This is also the catalyst for the main story, as this would mark the start of the tie-in program, using these plants in conjunction with Bane's venom to develop a concoction to make treatment more bearable for the patients. Eventually we figure out that this is not the case, as it was Joker all along. The tint of the place has a distinctively green hue, as the area is chlorophylled up with sprawling vines and overgrown greenery. The halls are decrepit. No longer are they just walls, they're living beings. The place is falling apart, new walkways and paths formed by the power of nature. The apiary in particular is probably the least well-kept place in the Asylum. At any given moment that place looks like it can just crumble. Surely they could have hired a couple of horticulturists and some builders to fix the place up. That Wayne Fund money is drying up, I guess. The Asylum was built around the Arkham Mansion, the home of the Arkhams before Amadeus turned it into a facility for the criminally insane. This gothic mansion is larger than life itself, with its own clock tower to boot. The hallways, rooms and corridors are drawn out, stringing one wing to the other. The mansion has its own private library, a room of records as well as offices for the doctors and warden. The mansion also houses a collection of weapons and accessories belonging to some of Gotham's most notorious criminals, such as Roman Sionis' Black Mask in Dr. Young's office. A few of Penguin's umbrellas encased in the hallway to the library, and the ventriloquist doll Scarface in a glass cabinet off to the side in the warden's area. This entire place is showering with opulence and grandeur. Statues and paintings scattered throughout the grandiose halls. These aren't just normal pieces of decor though. No. Quincy Sharp has way too much of an ego for that. Most of the statues and paintings are of himself. Greedy, we would only realise how much so during Arkham City. Saying that, we could find his master plan in Arkham Asylum. If we blow up the wall in his quarters, we can see his plans to build his mega prison, cordoning off a section of Gotham to accommodate prisoners who have free reign to do whatever they want, as long as they don't try to escape. There's also another cool Easter egg that leads into the main plot of City. Just outside Dr. Young's office, you can find an arrangement of mortuary fridges. One is open with a dead man inside, toe-tagged with the name Ra's al Ghul, the frontman for the League of Assassins. Come back again later and you'll be shocked to discover that his body has disappeared. presumably recovered by the League to resurrect him in the Lazarus Pit. So far I'm painting the asylum as this horrid place that should have been shut down long before it even opened, and I am. In fact, it's so bad that the prisoners, patients, would rather not live at all than spend another day there. Down the side of intensive treatment is a cave entrance. Following that down will lead to a cliff edge known as Dead Man's Point, a popular spot where inmates would jump off to their demise. Batman also uses this point to glide around to the left and land on a ledge. This ledge provides access to the hidden Batcave underneath the asylum, constructed for when events like this happen, where he doesn't have access to the main Batcave. This area is quite bare bones compared to the others, equipped with only enough to deal with incidents on the island, which is a computer with a few monitors and some bridges leading out into the sewers. Even then, these look like they weren't finished properly, cobbled together to just be enough to get the job done in times of necessity. At any given moment, it looks like one wrong thing could wreck the place. Good job it was bare bones, as it gets destroyed later on in the game anyway, by Titan plants. I'm sure that wouldn't have been fun to try and claim insurance on. Graphically, I think this game still holds up today. It's quite detailed for a game from 2009, relatively speaking. It does lack that extra bit of detail and sharpness that modern games have if you zoom in or focusing on an object, but unless you're nitpicking and trying to find something to complain about, it's a non-issue since you'd never do it anyway. The character models are quite detailed and seem to be the priority in terms of modelling. Every character and outfit had tons of care put into them, even adding some minor details that they could honestly get away with if they left them absent from the final product. Like how Batman's suit gets progressively more damage the further in the story you are. They could have just not done that, and I doubt many would have cared, but adding it in emphasised the story and pushed it one step further. It's the little things that make a good game great. One thing that definitely hasn't held up though is the facial animations. The synchronization between the words and the mouth movements just aren't very good at all. This was highlighted even more in the Return to Arkham versions, but I was playing the Game of the Year version, so it were a lesser issue. I read that during development, they had one guy whose only job was to develop the cape's animation and physics. It flows extremely well, if we just disregard the clipping through objects. I think we'd be expecting too much from them though if we didn't. The moon is abnormally large in this game. It also lends itself into the atmosphere of the game, as the moonlight casts a tinge on the asylum that I don't think any streetlight could have done. It's dingy and dismal, making the surrounding areas feel grimy and muddy. I think my biggest gripe with a lot of old games and the Arkham games presentation specifically are that a lot of the cutscenes are pre-rendered. They ultimately are a product of the time and aren't very common anymore for that reason. These have by far aged the worst, 30 FPS compressed and blurry, almost an eyesore whenever I have to sit through them. If these were in engine, so they could scale with the frame rate and resolution, it would be 10 times better, but during my playthrough they just sort of took me out of it. It was super jarring going from gameplay to a cutscene when I reached them. Not fun.
Take me on home to the asylum. Never alone in the asylum. Anarchy ruled, it was wild, but through it all you never smiled. Joke's on you.
Arkham Asylum is a near-perfect example of when pure passion is poured into making a game. Every part of this game you can tell has had hours dedicated to it, nothing was phoned in. This game would lay the foundation for the future of not just the 3 sequels, but the future of action-adventure games as a whole. Even now, if we compare Asylum to these newer iterations, it still holds up remarkably well today, which is a testament to how good the core formula is. 14 years later and they're still not changing the fundamentals, just iterating on it. It don't matter that Asylum's simple and relatively bare bones compared to the other games, because it still provides pure fun and thrill, and it is still argued by fans as being their favourite game in the series. Now I'm not saying that this game is perfect, because it's not. There are quite a few issues within that do hamper the experience, but not enough to detract from the overall enjoyment. The combat and stuff is smooth and satisfying, the moments you're doing detective work and piecing together the puzzles are great. The story's pretty good as well. These all culminate to make a pretty enjoyable game that you should probably play if you haven't already. I do wish this game eventually gets properly remastered, with the graphical fidelity of Night, in-engine cutscenes and refinement in the combat, i.e. ironing out the jank. They're releasing all 3 on Switch, but I don't think they're actually remasters, just ports. I think they should do it in the form of a collection similar to the Mafia Definitive Editions, just better everything. Overall, Arkham Asylum is a pretty good game for nearing 15-year-old. I'd like to thank you for watching. This video has been quite long, and if you somehow made it to the end I commend you. Let me know what other topics you'd like covering, and I'll see if it's feasible to do so. Feel free to subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and Enjoy the rest of your day.